Hello and welcome to the Lib Dem Podcast. For this week, we are going to be talking about the only thing we can really talk about, and that is the death of David Amess and what that means for politicians, for people who go on campaign. What is the aftermath of that murder? Should the Lib Dems be fighting that by-election? What does that mean? Is there an argument about the political discourse in this country? Will it be like Joe Cox and everyone said, oh, this is awful, and then very quickly went back into old habits of throwing mud? So with me to discuss this is Hannah Kitching, who is the leader of the Lib Dems in Barnsley. Hello, Hannah.
Hi there, good afternoon.
My name is John Potter. I'm the leader of the Preston Lib Dems and a Lancashire County Councillor. So Hannah, I mean, it is truly awful. And I remember as soon as it happened, we were talking on the podcast, just the absolute sadness. I mean, we probably couldn't get someone who is more divergent politically from where we are. But actually thinking about his family, and actually what it did kind of show is you can be completely politically different but still be a good person and try and do the best for his area. So what was your immediate thoughts?
The news these days, you never get a full story, do you? Things coming in sort of dribs and drabs. And I saw just while scrolling social media on Friday afternoon that so David Amess had been stabbed multiple times outside his constituency surgery. That was the first news that came through. And it very much just brought back those memories of what happened to Joe Cox. Just that shock, I think, that it's happened again, that anyone thinks that that's the solution to some kind of disagreement with someone. You know, I know a lot of people are saying we should never have to preface this with despite our political differences. But I think we do really, because actually, and a lot of people are saying, you know, David was a really kind of generous, you know, compassionate, really good MP. You know, let's be honest, John, even if he was the worst MP in the world, he still doesn't deserve to get stabbed outside his constituency surgery. You know, no one does.
We don't know the motive of the murder. So that is one of the key things right now. We have absolutely no idea. Obviously, there's wild speculation about Islamic fundamentalism and things like that. That might be a motive, but we have no idea why he was targeted or what the motive was. That we just don't know. But obviously, the Joe Cox murder, we do know had a political motive behind it. But like I say, whether that is sometimes an excuse because someone has various other illnesses as part of them. But that does go into the whole discourse issue. Is you might speak angry, and there's been lots of stuff recently about whether calling people scum, traitors, saboteurs, enemies of the people, all this other thing. You might be able to take that on board and filter it through a kind of through a political knowledge that you know that actually this is part of the victory of getting your point across. But someone might read that and hear that and actually take it on board and do something with it. And I think that is the problem when you get this sort of language in politics.
Yeah, I mean, you know, the baseline here is that extremism is a bad thing. You know, whether that's religious extremism, whether that's political extremism. You know, we do know that Joe Cox was murdered by a right-wing extremist. You know, we don't know anything about the motives here. It would be unfair to speculate, but, you know, if there does, I know the suspect is being held under the Terrorist Act, and if there again turns out to be some kind of political extremism or fundamentalism there, you know, no matter where it is on the spectrum, it's not a good thing. And anything within, as you say, the language of discussion, the language of political discourse, the language the media use that puts a flame under that kind of extremist thinking is not a good thing, and something that we as politicians, I guess, need to model good behaviour on, because we do disagree, and it's right that we disagree, but we need to disagree well. And you know, there's always going to be outlying situations, isn't there? But it is, I think, for any of us that are elected and are involved in public service, you know, you put yourself out there and you make yourself available to your constituents and your residents, whether that's doing constituency surgeries, whether that's going for meetings with residents. You know, I meet residents privately. I go into residents' homes at their invitation to meet with them, whether that's just being a living member of your community. I know Daisy Cooper has said not only is she the MP for St Albans, she's also a resident of St Albans. So, she's out there going to the supermarket, going out to bars, going about her day-to-day business, catching trains. And, I know government ministers enjoy a certain level of protection, as befits the role, where, how far do you take that? If you start talking about police protection for MPs, well, what about council leaders? What about
staff?
Staff? Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. That's the other side of it as well, isn't it? I know lots of Lib Dem friends who have worked for MPs, and they say, the death threats and the abuse, they're just day-to-day part of the job, and we talk about other elected representatives, I guess in ways that we perhaps, wouldn't talk about other members of the public. And
Hello, John from the Lib Dem Podcast here. We are delighted to say that this episode is sponsored by Prater Rains. Now more than ever, you need a professional-looking online presence and website. Prater Rains have been helping Liberal Democrat campaigns succeed for 18 years. Their Lib Dem Foci package combines a website, social media and email system to help Lib Dems win. You'll receive great support from real people, fair pricing and a huge range of features to choose from. Prater Rains are already the bespoke developers for Lighthouse, Lib Dem Draw Online and the LD Directory. They combine a talented system design with an unrivaled understanding of our party, our data and our systems. To find out more, check out the Prater Rains website at praterrains.co.uk/liberal-democrats. Let's go back to the actual incident and the kind of security element of it, because you're right. It's quite interesting, because I stood against Ben Wallace at the last general election, actually the last 3 general elections. And at a hustings in 2019, I rocked up and 2 fairly large blokes came over and said, hi, who are you? And I just thought they were members of the public chat. And then it turns out they were Secret Service agents, because Ben Wallace is defence minister, so he gets a detail. And I remember being quite surprised at that. It didn't quite compute that MPs, even ministers, need that sort of security. But so you're right. I mean, we've talked, Hannah, you've talked about being a councillor. When we were doing the episode about ward work and town hall work, you were saying, you've been stopped in supermarkets, you've been stopped in car parks, going out walking with the dog, etc. It is difficult for me to imagine being able to be a councillor without meeting the public. I don't see how that can work. And likewise, I mean, even if you took your address off, I mean, some councillors don't have their address public. I always have had my address public, but if someone was determined to do us harm, I'm not sure you can be an elected representative and mitigate all those risks.
No, I don't think you can. And we certainly had that discussion within my family when I stood for the general election in 2019. I knew I wasn't going to win, John, but sometimes one's spouses get a little bit carried away in the moment, don't they?
Do.
And yeah, I guess that's that sort of thought of, well, how would my life change? Would my life change? What about, popping the kids around school? What about popping into town to Tesco? And, certainly we don't see our MP wandering around, but whether that says more about her than about being an MP in general, I don't know. And yeah, what level of seniority do you need to get to? And let's remember as well, so David Amess, he had been an MP for an extremely long time. Yeah. This man he will have done hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of constituency surgeries, and meetings with the public and so on and so forth. And I guess, all of the MPs across the country do, day in and day out, by and large, they're fairly safe, in doing that. And while these incidents that we know about are too many, are they enough to pull MPs away from their public. I think the impression that I've been getting from the comments I've seen from MPs is, no. I know a number of MPs posted quite defiantly on Saturday morning that they were, they were going through their surgeries. And I guess if we roll it back,
including the speaker said, Lindsay Hoyle said that night he was doing something in Chorley. So because the argument is, if we fundamentally reduce our democratic access, is that what the enemies of democracy want?
Well, and if we roll it out to other types of terrorism, and I'm using that word, I think, only because that is the word that's sort of being used by the police at the moment. I feel like, remember the bomb attack at Manchester Arena at the Ariana Grande concert. I remember posting at the time that, if I had tickets, or if my girls had tickets to go to a pop concert that weekend, that I would let them go, because otherwise, as you say, the terrorists are getting what they want, and trying to, as in this case, trying to silence democracy, stop the democratic process. And so good on those MPs, because I suspect they all, they took a deep breath before they went to those surgeries on Saturday morning, and I bet their families have had a tough weekend as well. I saw Kim Leadbeater, who is obviously Joe Cox's sister, who recently won the Batley and Spen by-election, is now the MP for that area. It must have been incredibly hard for her to stand for that role in that constituency anyway, given what happened to Joe. And for then this to happen, I saw on social media, she posted that her partner had called her and gone, I want you to stop. I want you to stop. I want you to stop doing this. I don't want you to do this anymore. And, you have a lot of sympathy for our MPs and the families of our MPs, who will have had that niggling concern in the back of their heads, probably always, then heightened since Joe was murdered, and then heightened again this weekend. And good for them for keeping on putting themselves out there, because it's the only thing to do.
And we will do a lesson as we get a fuller picture of what happens in regards to this case. We will probably do another episode about lessons to be learned, because right now we don't know what lessons to be learned, because we don't know, like I said, if this chap, according to speculation, has some sort of fundamental terrorist kind of agenda, then no amount of prep was ever going to probably stop him. And that is an ugly truth sometimes of terrorism. But the benefit that we all get is that they always fail. That's it. No terrorism campaign has ever been successful, because it kind of galvanizes, as you've just said, that no, we're going to go out and keep doing it. So we will see how that develops. Now let's talk about political discourse. And I found a quote here, because there's been lots of stuff, and actually there's been a few little pointed things at Angela Rayner with the Tory scum comments and stuff like that, which I want to kind of avoid here, because I think it's too easy to use that, especially when we don't know the motive, as has been explained. But I remember when Gabby Gifford got shot in the United States, and I can remember Barack Obama giving a speech. So I thought, well, I'd go and find out because it could have been very easy for Barack Obama to use that, particularly to fight to fight for better gun control and things like that. And actually he resisted. And I'll just read you one of the paragraphs from this speech. And he said, I won't have his oratory skills, but he said, "At a time when we are far too eager to lay the blame at all that ails the world at the feet of those who think differently than we do, it's important to pause for a moment and make sure we are talking to each other in a way that heals, not in a way that wounds." And he's absolutely right. Now, me and you might be described as fairly bullish counsellors, Hannah. We don't take guff. But at what level have we got to with political discourse in this country? I mean, I remember we've talked about budget issues where, we get very defensive because sometimes we get an attack, particularly our group, and we want to defend someone who's having a go at our group. But does discourse, is it going to change? Does it have to change? Or is this part and parcel of political life in Britain now?
It's difficult, isn't it? I think a lot of us are very good at drawing the line between, I guess, kind of political sparring and getting your jabs in an appropriate arena for that. So, across the council chamber, across the floor in the House of Commons. I know some members of the public, don't enjoy that and wish we had a more collaborative democracy. So someone needs to start supporting proportional representation if that's going to happen, because at the moment we don't. It's not a collaborative democracy, and I do maintain. We're both in opposition, John, and I do maintain you need robust opposition, and fundamentally we do have political differences. I had one of my new councillors. She really doesn't enjoy the politics at all, and she said to me, after spending another 3 hours at a full council meeting, she said, I just don't understand it, Hannah, why we all want the same thing. We all want what is best for the residents in the borough. Why do we spend 3 hours arguing about it? And I said, well, and there's two things. Yes, we do all want what's best for the residents in the borough, but our ideas of what's best for someone might be different. And also our ideas of how you get to that point are different. I said, so that's what we're arguing over. We're not arguing over the fundamental, we want what's best for people, but there are different ways that can look. And I think that resonated with her as a relatively lay politician, I suppose. But I don't think we can stop the political discourse. I don't think we can stop the political sparring. The question, I guess, is how do we draw the lines? And I personally, I always try, if I run into one of the councillors out and about or in a more casual meeting, I'm always friendly. I'm always chatty, always polite, hi, how are you doing? How's the family? I have to say, I don't always get that reciprocated, but, at the end of the day, we're human beings. And that's a reason as well why I really dislike you get this narrative sometimes in Labour circles of I'd never be friends with a Tory or
never kissed a Tory and stuff like that.
Never kissed a Tory. I've kissed Tories. Yeah. So what? Some of them are really lovely people and also good kissers. And
but you're right though.
We're all human beings, at the end of the day, it's important to have an acknowledgement. Could I spend my life married to someone with completely different political views? For me personally, I don't think I could. But some people do. Wendy Chamberlain. Yeah, her husband is an SNP activist. They disagree on the most fundamental question in Scotland, unionism versus independence. So it works for some people. And so, I wouldn't ever want to get rid of political differences and political discourse and political arguments, but that needs to be, to some extent, kept in a box. Yeah. I think.
And I think you're right. So there's people on Preston. So I can have fundamental differences with some people in Preston Council. As soon as we're out of the council chamber, we will chat. We could probably have a beer together and it would be no problem whatsoever. But there's one of those one or two councillors, particularly, again, on the extreme left or the extreme right, who for them, you seem like the enemy. And this is where it gets things. So I've even tried on some of these people to say, like, little social events, go and have a chat. And there's just nothing there because they fundamentally think you are in the wrong no matter what you do. And they don't separate that. And that's what leads to, unfortunately, this sort of toxic discourse.
And I think that has been, I think that has been a nice thing over the past few days about the discourse around David Amess. Personally, I don't know anything about him. I've genuinely never heard of him before. I'm from the wrong end of the country. I don't know about his voting record. I can guess. But
it's very different to us. And that's actually a really key point. He was an ultra right-wing conservative, pro-death penalty, pro-Brexit, anti-abortion. There was all sorts of things we would disagree with. But, and this is a key point, he had a stonkingly good reputation for being a constituency MP and for being a decent bloke. Now, and it seemed like, from reports, again, never met the chap, but it would seem like that regardless of who you were or what your belief, he would leave his political views to help you. And I think that is a key part of this, that, and something we taught to new candidates around, you don't have to agree with everyone all the time. That isn't what politics is about. We are not some kind of soup of just kind of ideas that we can interchange. Scrutiny is very important. And going back to your point, vivid and strong scrutiny is vital to improve things in our services. We're both in opposition. If you're nice and don't cause a ruckus, then there's no incentive for them to change. If in your opinion you think they're doing something wrong, where if you cause an unholy stink about something, then actually you can actually force them to turn around and change something that was going to be bad. But if it's just convenient and they don't feel threatened by it, and I don't mean physical threatened, I mean actually politically worried that you are going to have an impact on it, then they won't change, because there's no incentive for them to change.
Because why should they? And particularly, we've got a similar situation on my council, to the government. It's the ruling party's got a very, very comfortable majority. And, that takes away that need for collaboration and compromise and, needing to work with people. But I think it's been a nice exercise, actually, a lovely exercise for people on all sides of the house to sit and reflect on Sir David and say, okay, completely disagree with this man's stance on abortion. However, we actually, I believe he was really good on the animal rights stuff, that we've got in common, this we've got in common. It's the Joe Cocker quote, isn't it? More in common than that which divides us. And, I think some of us, it is perhaps a timely reminder, because, I don't think things feel great in this country politically at all. I think, we do have pretty much the worst government in living memory. Yep. And, is it a bad thing to perhaps be reminded that, we are all human beings? Are we all trying to do our best? Let's give them the benefit of the doubt, just for this episode, John.
Yeah.
It won't last. People are trying to do their best. And I guess we need to humanize our opposition rather than dehumanize them.
But that's a really good point, because the whole thing about I think it was Laura Pidcock said she's never been friends with a Tory. She's never been friends with that. If you have that means she has no idea. I have really good friends who are completely diametrically opposed to me politically, but actually does that mean they're not good blokes? No, of course it doesn't. It just means for a certain aspect, they just disagree with me on a way forward. But if you only surround yourself with people who are politically the same as you, you are going to have a warped sense of perspective in terms of the opposition. And Laura Pickett was a classic example where she just assumed everyone who was Tory was somehow a wrong un, and then she got booted out of office. So
lived in an echo chamber. And I think particularly, okay, as a layperson or as a member or as an activist, think that way if you want to. But once you are elected, you have to represent everyone, whether they voted for you or not, and do I feel that I have an MP? No, I don't, because she doesn't respond to my emails. She won't work with me as a councillor. She won't respond to my concerns as a resident. I understand why she does that, because she sees me as a political opponent. But, all those Labour trolls who've bothered me on Twitter, fundamentally, if any one of them rang me up and went, Hannah, my bin's been missed, or I've got a problem, I'd sort it for them, because, you don't get to choose who you represent.
Yeah.
And it sounded, there might be a bit of, rose-tinted glasses, but it does sound very much like that was Sir David Amess's record as a constituency MP, that he had his political views, he held them firmly, but he was willing to represent every single one of his constituents to the best of his ability. And that's a good politician, whatever party they're from.
Absolutely. And we'll move on now onto the issue of what happens next. So It's actually, I found this a really interesting debate. So I'll say right from the start, I think the Lib Dems were right not to contest that seat. I think, but it just felt, and we're going to talk about some of the arguments about for and against that. And I don't think, I mean, I love campaigning. I really, really enjoy it, but I don't think it didn't feel right, just right in me gut. I just couldn't think, like, after someone's been murdered, to contest that election felt wrong. What are your thoughts, Hannah, before we get into some of the weeds of this issue?
Yeah, I mean, I completely agree. I think that's a precedent that was set with Joe Cox, and I think it's right to continue it. I think it's difficult because, and I mean, people that listen to the podcast will know I'm an absolutely, rabid advocate of we always stand. I would stand in the speaker's seat. I see absolutely no reason why Lindsay Hall should get free riding, surely. I know that's sacrilege to some people, but I would stand everywhere. I would stand against Caroline Lucas. I would stand against everyone. But this situation, no. To some extent, this by-election, it's almost a shame the by-election has to go ahead, really, doesn't it? Because once people aren't standing, it becomes meaningless. It fundamentally just needs to be an administrative exercise. This person was murdered. We have to assume it was that there was an element of politics to that. He was murdered in his capacity as an MP, not just out of bad luck. And yeah, to some extent, it just needs to be an administrative exercise to get that constituency a replacement slotted in, and then that constituency can almost go to the polls, properly at the next general election. I do think it's difficult because I think all the arguments I usually make about how we should stand, do stand. And I think that people, I do think it's not right from a democratic point of view. I mean, if you lived in that constituency, how would you vote in that by-election coming up? I probably just, to be honest, John, I probably just wouldn't even bother.
So let's go through some of these pro and con kind of arguments and get into it. So this is, before anyone writes in and tells us how evil, this is kind of a bit of devil's advocacy just to get those issues out about why this isn't a straight cut. Let's not stand. Let's talk about. So one of the questions you have to ask is, what level of tragedy does it have to be for you to not stand a candidate? Which is a good. So you have James Brokenshire very sadly dies of cancer, very young. That will be a by-election which will be contested. However, a murder victim by-election does not. How do you make that call? Is, again, I am, politics isn't, sometimes of the head, it's of the heart and the gut and everything else. But Hannah, how can you possibly scale that in terms of how you deal with what level? So if I don't have an answer to it, and I don't know if listeners have an answer to it, but how do you know which is acceptable to stand and which isn't?
No, I know. I do know what you're saying, John, because James Brokenshire's death was, incredibly sad. I would argue not unexpected. He'd stepped down from a number of duties, and I do think there's a little bit of a difficult situation with MPs in that they tend not to resign. When an MP becomes unwell, they could resign. And they could force by-election due to resignation, due to ill health. But as a general rule, they tend not to. They tend to die in office. And we really can't have a situation where we have MPs dying in office rather than resigning, because then there's an uncontested by-election at the end of it. Yeah. So I think, as much of a tragedy of a young man such as James Brokenshire was, I do think it's right to contest that by-election. I suppose then there's the argument of sudden death in office, isn't there? One of our wonderful Lib Dem activists here in Sheffield died very suddenly last month. I think there's something different about murder, John. I suppose I think you have to say that. There's something different about murder, and particularly when it appears to be a politically motivated murder. It just, like I say, I'm one of the most absolutely rabid advocates of always standing. And for me, this doesn't feel right. There will be people who do stand. We saw it in Batley and Spen, all sorts of right-wing extremist parties stood, and that's unpleasant, really, because it gives a voice and a platform to those. And yeah, it would be nice if it was just a bit of an administrative exercise.
But it goes on to think. I mean, again, just carrying on this thread. So some people have said, well, what about what are you doing to the people of Southend West? And a bit like in Batley and Spen. So the situation's awful, but giving them virtually no say in who is going to be probably one of the most important people in the entire area, is that compounding something awful with something bad? And making the situation worse.
But the flip of that, John, is we can't have, we can't have people thinking that if you want to get rid of an MP and have a nice juicy by-election,
just take them out.
No, I mean, here's a devil's advocate question for you. This is I think that this is an easy call for both us and for the Labour Party, because, at the end of the day, it's very comfortable. He's got a stonking majority, didn't he? Yeah. It's not a marginal. And Labour came out very quickly with this statement, and we followed on. How would we feel if this was one of, and I'm not going to name them because I don't think that's fair, but if this was one of our marginal constituencies? Yeah. And how would Labour feel about it if it was one of their marginal constituencies? Or how would the Conservatives feel? Because I don't think Batley and Spen was really quite so marginal back when.
No, it wasn't.
When Trey was murdered. So I hope we never have to find out, because I hope we never have this situation again. But I do think, in a constituency with an incumbent party majority like that, it's a pretty easy call.
Does it matter who the candidate is? So again, this is me playing completely devil's advocate. So you'd assume and hope the Tories will pick someone sensible in the same mould as David Amess, someone who's constituency focused, very diligent, wanting to do right by people. For example, what if someone, say, like Nigel Farage, came back into the Tory fold, a failed politician, divisive, ugly, controversial figure, and he was allowed a free run at a seat? Would we feel different?
Well, we probably would, but by the time the nominations have closed, and that name's on that ballot paper, it's too late, isn't it? I mean, that's what we're doing fundamentally by making this call. We're putting trust in the. I don't know how the Conservatives select and manage their candidates. I don't know how. I wouldn't like to comment on how they do that, but we're putting trust in the Conservatives because this is to all intents and purposes an appointment. Yeah. And that is, it's a fantastic opportunity for someone. And it's also, it's a privilege. And I think David Amess would say that it was a privilege to serve Southend. And, whoever gets either parachuted or, selected into that seat, it is a privilege. And I hope they treat it with the respect it deserves. And to be fair, I think Tracy Brabin did do that until she slept off to be West Yorkshire Mayor.
So that kind of ends this part, I think. I mean, what I have seen some people comment said, actually, why don't Labour and Lib Dems just put forward a paper candidate, which would have been maybe a sensible middle ground. But, as we've talked about, I think in a stonking Tory majority area, and the circumstance of his death, not standing a candidate sits right with me. And I think with most people that will be right.
It's not a general election, is it, John? It's a by-election. It's a by-election that, let's be honest, shouldn't really be shouldn't be happening.
With a government with a huge majority.
With a government that's the other question as well, isn't it? What if it wasn't? But the fundamental stance for me is definitely I do think it is the right decision. though I do appreciate some people might be a little bit uncomfortable with it. Not not limited, of course, to the good Lib Dem voters of Southend.
Absolutely, but I suppose it also highlights something, and we don't want to get too Lib Dem wonky here, but it is something actually how crap our voting system is when this sort of stuff happens as well. As in, you can remember, I remember, I can't think, it might have even been Yorkshire. You'll correct me if I'm wrong, where an MEP stood down, and then it just went to the next person on the party list from that thing, which I think was actually his wife or something like that. I think, was it Rebecca Taylor or someone like that?
I'm not wonky enough to remember those kind of details, but yes, you are right, and you do see it as well. So I don't know if you the Sheffield Hildreth Brightside election. I can't quite remember his name. Harry someone. Anyway, the sitting MP died, and the Labour Party selected his successor, who was elected in a contested by-election with a comfortable majority. Just happened to be his wife, Jill Furness.
Yeah, but it does go to show again, and because it's single member elections, it becomes very difficult. It's like you were talking about a Sheffield Lib Dem who died. There are still other councillors that represent that area at the time, and again, when you believe, like, well, I certainly do, and Lib Dem policy is to have multi-member constituencies, it does cushion against, so an area isn't being left without representation. Yes, sorry, go on.
There's another delightful example of that one's on as well that's also been in the news this week, which is, of course, Claudia Webb.
Yes. Oh, crikey, yeah, of course.
So I'm from Leicester, actually, though not that part of Leicester. So Keith Baz was never my MP, but he was a very well-known, Labour MP, and well known as being a good MP, actually. A lot of my family in Leicester were involved in the Labour Party. I did meet him on a couple of occasions. Poor old Keith Baz, of course, fell from grace and was then roundly deselected by a momentum taken over constituency Labour Party in Leicester East, which presented the constituents with the absolute delight that is Claudia Webb.
Yeah.
She's now been she's suspended from the Labour Party, so she sits as an independent MP, and continues to be a complete and utter embarrassment to all who selected and elected her. Now there's a by-election that needs to happen.
Yeah, but it's an interesting one because it's about, I think we're talking about civil discourse, and it kind of wraps the whole thing up about there feels like that the latest intake of MPs seem to be very ideologically driven to the point where, and you think of, I mean, there's lots of jokes about how the 2019 MPs are very poor in terms of what they do, but because they were elected during a time when Britain was so polarized that you get very right wingers on the Tory side and very left wingers on the Corbynista side of Labour, and is that actually also contributing to this discourse as well, that you're getting fairly average MPs that only seem to have got elected because they pleased a particular extreme flank of their party?
Maybe. I think that within this government, so within the Conservative Party in particular, I think obedience is more highly prized than it perhaps once was. We lost a big swathe of, I think, obviously not people I agree with politically, but decent, robust, challenging.
Yeah, like the Dominic Greaves and the Sarah Wollaston's of this world.
Yeah, absolutely. Anna Soubry, that kind of group. There was a massive exodus of those before 2019 who were replaced with, yes men. Nodding dogs. And it seems like that obedience is highly prized, and I really dislike this discourse from the Conservative Party that, I mean, I see it here locally. We saw it in the Batlington by-election. The sort of pork barrelling. If you vote for a Tory, you'll get the good stuff.
Yeah.
People like David Amess fought for the good stuff for his constituency. For
1983.
Since 1983, exactly. He had his campaigns, make Southend a city. He campaigned for what he thought what was right. And I doubt he ever went out with that promise of, if we get a Tory government, I'll get you more good stuff, because that's I don't know, that just doesn't seem to be right for his kind of generation of MPs somehow. Yeah. Whereas, that real, it's pork barreling, isn't it?
It is very,
bribery, and it's nasty. It's nasty. I don't like it, and it makes you feel like
it's not transactional. Politics isn't transactional. You do this, you get that. It doesn't work like that. And I think that's why also you see corruption, people buying influence, all sorts of things that is now really hurts the image of politicians, comes from that kind of idea that politics is somehow transactional when it's not. It's about betterment, and it's about doing what you can. And me and you, Hannah, may spend however many years as councillors trying to be an MP or trying to do the, but we might not get to what goals we want personally out of politics, but we'll have helped thousands of people along the way. And that's the key.
You've got an option, haven't you, if you want to be an MP? You can pick your seat, pick your party based on that, cross your fingers behind your back, shut your mouth, keep your head down. And, and I do believe there are plenty of MPs on both sides, who do that. They fundamentally are decent constituency MPs. They keep the gobs shut, they keep the head down, they march through the lobbies the way they're told to. They don't overthink the fact they're voting to kill babies or whatever it is, they're being asked to do. They just get on with it. And, if you want to be an MP, maybe that's the way to do it. And then you've got people like, as you say, like us, who go, actually, no, I'm not prepared to do that. We're going to put our principles first and struggle to get to that kind of position where you can make a difference. But, I feel like I can sleep at night in a way I couldn't if I was a Tory or a Labour MP.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's where we'll leave it. So from, again, all political bias coming, so, David Amess's death was an unbelievable shock, and it is a tragedy not just for him, his family, but actually on what we believe in, why we're involved in politics. He was doing what he should be doing. He was doing what was right. He was doing what his constituents needed him to do, and he was murdered while doing it. So on behalf of the pod, we would obviously pass all our sympathies on to his family. But what do you guys think of it? What do the listeners and viewers of this podcast, do you think Lib Dem should stand a candidate in the by-election? Do you think, are you put off from putting on politics? No, like I said, I've mentioned it before, me and Hannah are quite bullish about this sort of stuff. But I do wonder if there are people who think, you know what, it just doesn't feel safe. The atmosphere just doesn't feel safe. And obviously, all people who are worried about it, we should just say, regardless of what colour campaigner or councillor you are, there is support and advice out there from places like the LGA, from the ALDC, if you're Lib Dem wise, about keeping safe while campaigning. And if you're worried at all, either contact me and Hannah. We're always open to chat to anyone. If anyone thinking, I just don't know anymore, or talk to someone in those, like I say, at the LGA or the ALDC. And, there's always advice and help out there for people who are scared and this has actually been a shock to. But no, thank you very much, Hannah, for coming on today. We'll have more episodes coming up with lots and lots of other issues that are happening, whether that's to do with trans rights, to do with who our future MPs are. We've got lots of issues coming up. Obviously, there's stuff like the COP26 climate agenda that's happening at the moment. We're going to have Rishi's autumn budget is coming up. What does that mean for us all, particularly as councillors? So there's lots of stuff going on. So do have a good rest of your day. Thank you so much again, Hannah. Do follow the podcast at Lib Dem Pod. Do comment, do like. We see them all. Sometimes there's lots and lots of feedback, so we really do appreciate it. But thank you very much for watching and listening, and we'll be back with another episode very soon.